little intimidating when you look at the roster and you see former bosses and people who speaking ability you admire far more than your own. Mick Pond, thank you very much. Admiral Cutler, good to see you. Don. But it's a real honor to be here. I think it's really cool that we're doing this Navy and Army together. We've always, when I was the Navy's Chief of Legislative Affairs, we admired the Association of United States Army. We wanted the Navy League to aspire, and I mean this, to the kind of organizational reach and clout that you have, and so I think teaming together gets us there. Winston, my former boss, used to say all the time, Winston Churchill, one of his quotes was, the only thing harder than fighting with allies is fighting without them. And so I look at the room tonight, we're not fighting. This is very good, Army and Navy together. We aspire to carry that fight to the enemy, not to each other. It's truly good. I thank General Ham, and I've always been an admirer of yours for putting this bug in our ear a few months back, many months back. It took a little while to land, but we're really looking forward to the opportunity to have a dialogue. So I'm sure you all are thinking of those difficult questions. I wish my wife was here. The beginning of my job, I frame around my wife and her roots to Brazil. So it was spring of last year, 2018. We were in Afghanistan. Secretary Mattis said to me, hey, I'm thinking that for your next job of SOUTHCOM, go home and ask your wife what she thinks about that. And I said, I'm honored, sir. I'm honored. He goes, you're not listening again. I don't really care what you think. I want you to go home and ask your wife what she thinks. And I said, well, her dad's from Brazil and came to the United States. He's still with us. He's 92 now. When he was 16 years old, U.S. citizen now, and so her entire family's from Latin America. He goes, I knew that. That's why I made the call. And I'm not sure that he did, but he takes all the credit for it. So fast forward a couple months, August of 2018, we had the opportunity to travel together, the Secretary of Defense, myself, and our team to Brazil, Chile, Argentina, and Colombia. 4 days, 4 countries. It was a lot of time for cultural enrichment, sightseeing. No, we were very busy. But what struck me and has struck me since is a tremendous opportunity that we have here in this hemisphere, in our neighborhood. It's really our shared neighborhood. If you think about the warfighting domains that we are familiar with, land, sea, air, space, cyber, add one, values, add family, add the connections that we share here in this hemisphere that really are unique to our neighborhood. We've been talking about this at Southern Command as our shared neighborhood. Of course, there's no new good idea. And there was a former policy back in U.S. history. It's the good neighbor policy. But it resonates with our friends in this hemisphere. When you talk about shared values, a shared neighborhood, mutual respect, and respect for those kind of things that we hold dear in this room. 27 of 31 countries in Latin America and the Caribbean are democracies. The 4 holdouts being Venezuela, Bolivia, Nicaragua, and Cuba. But 27 is a pretty good scorecard. And they respect rule of law, human rights, democracy, the kind of things that sovereignty, the kind of things that we hear in this room. So the opportunity struck me in August of last year. Put the first slide on. So if you take a look at this from a different perspective, and you look at this from the perspective of Latin America, and respective of our neighborhood, and just kind of flip it upside down, and we think about that opportunity. I had our annual conference of Chiefs of Defense in Natal, Brazil. So 1 year ago, 2018, August, trip with Secretary Mattis. This year, in August, in Brazil with the Chiefs of Defense from across the hemisphere. And it really validated that sense of prosperity and opportunity, and despite what you might read, optimism in some respects, many respects. But it also, all those things we share, the values, the domains, I also have a heightened sense of urgency of how important it is that we get after that, how really urgent the threats that we face to those domains, how serious those threats are. What a sense of urgency we should have and do have at our command to get after those threats. And so I'll talk about those threats. Talk about them in terms of a vicious circle that starts with young democracies. Guatemala, for example. was in civil war in 1996. Most of our Central American nations were in civil war in the 90s. We're familiar with Just Cause in Panama, Urgent Fury in Grenada, and there's been coups and turmoil. But they're democracies with institutions and professionals that want to do the right thing, by and large. So young democracies with weak institutions. Not all, but many weak institutions. Along with that is the threat of corruption. And you say, well, why is the combatant commander talking about corruption? Well, when corruption is endemic to an institution, it underrides the trust that's inherent to do our job, and it eats at that trust. So young democracies, weak institutions, corruptions, transnational criminal organizations. You think drug cartels, that's part of it, but they deal in everything. They deal in people, weapons, illegal mining, fishing, and they're opportunistic and in many cases have more financial resources than the nation's security forces that they're a part of. And that runs up and down the length of this hemisphere, unfortunately. We went to New York City. My XO, Colonel Pat Ellis, is here with me. He comes from good stock. His dad's a retired 4-star Navy admiral, and he's a West Point grad. And I said I wouldn't say anything bad about Army Navy tonight, although we do play Air Force Saturday. Any Air Force Academy grads? A few of my classmates here, so I know you're going to ask me some tough questions. But when you think about these threats and how they thread together, and that corruption and the transnational criminal organizations and how those organizations just permeate across the continent, it really is alarming. We went to New York City. We sat down with the Joint Strike Task Force for Drugs at NYPD 1, and they painted a picture of a connection between corruption, crime, transnational criminal organizations, nation states, corrupt officials, and China, and the money laundering that comes to China, through China, which kind of leads me to my next bin of threats in this vicious circle. And that are countries, we came up with different words, that are malign actors. They don't have the same values of democracy, rule of law, human rights, respect for sovereignty, and we have to put China and Russia in that category. And as a military guy, I don't ask our partners to choose. I want to be the partner of choice. I'm not here to ask them to choose between China and the United States, but I simply ask, where are you on the scale of professionalism, respect for rule of law, human rights? And if it's one of those 27 democracies that we're working with, the answer is pretty clear. So China and Russia fall into that vicious circle of threats. And they have moved in a way that all of us should find alarming. 56 port deals China's working on across the Western Hemisphere. 60 if you add in North America, the Bahamas, Mexico. Some small deals, and I'm talking seaports. It's bigger if you expand it to airports, roadways. Recently, in one of our Caribbean countries, they built a road across the country. Part of the road deal was that they got 1,000 acres bordering either road, and they get the right to take all the tolls and set all the tolls for that road for the next 99 years. It doesn't sound like a very good deal to have a road built through your country. So I do consider China a threat to democracy, to the stability of this neighborhood. The National Defense Strategy rightly called that out when we called out competition with Russia and China as a key piece of that National Defense Strategy. So think about that vicious circle. And when we met in Natal, Brazil, we met on 19 August this year. And 19 August 1942 was a bad day for Brazil. 5 merchant ships went down due to U-boats. And 4 days later, Brazil declared war against Germany before the United States did. If you look at this, we don't quite have the African coast. That's the narrowest part of the Atlantic Ocean. So if you want to think about historical perspective and the need to work together, you need to go no other place than the home of the 4th Fleet. We now have our 4th Fleet in Mayport, Florida, but 4th Fleet was headquartered out of Natal, Brazil during World War II, where we worked closely with the Brazilians to turn the tide against Germany in the South Atlantic. Brazil would say they should be part of NATO, that they're an Atlantic power, and I don't disagree with them. There's a lot of opportunity there. So August 2018, August 2019. So what is it that Southern Command is doing to get after this vicious circle? What are we doing about that vicious circle of threats? Well, like any good command, we'll take a look at what the boss tells us to do, National Defense Strategy. We line that up. And Secretary Mattis said before I went south, he said, I think maybe you only have one line of effort. That's a term we use to organize the things we do, line of effort. And that's probably strengthen partnerships. Because strong partnerships, just like the partnership here in the room tonight, the teamwork between AUSA and the Navy League, strong partnerships what wins. Wins in life, wins in war. But it's not enough to have one line of effort. And I disagree with my boss for the first time ever. I said, boss, Title 10, United States law, says that I'm supposed to get after threats to the United States. So those partnerships have to do something. I have to be able to talk to my dad in Western Pennsylvania and tell him why it matters that we partner with Jamaica or Trinidad and Tobago or Brazil or Colombia, because it's got to matter to make this homeland safer. It's got to make the threat of transnational criminal organizations, drugs, which killed 70,000 people last year in this country, illegal immigration, it has got to lower that threat. And the Secretary agreed with me. So our lines of effort, strengthen partnerships, counter threats. But we have a third one. The third one, and that's building our own team. It's simply called Build Our Team. I would liken it to our National Defense Strategy's line of effort of reform the department. Because if you're not the best at the game, who wants to partner with you? Now, I grew up near Pittsburgh. I'm a big Steelers fan. We're not off to such a good start, and I really despise the fact that my son-in-law from New England dresses my grandchildren in Patriots gear for every single family photo that is posted online. It gets me. I can't sleep. It's killing me. But you know what? I'd rather partner with the Patriots right now. Who wants to partner with a team that's second best? That's why the United States military, why we have to be at the top of our game. And so for us, I say it starts and ends with looking in the mirror. Are we ready to go morally, mentally, physically? Are we the best partners is somebody going to want? And you can all be proud that we are, but that doesn't mean we're going to stay that way. Naval aviators, Admiral Fox, former boss, naval aviator, big killer, are an insufferable lot in most cases when it comes to their high confidence. But they do get one thing right. The best grade they ever give themselves when they land on an aircraft carrier is okay. Because they don't ever want to have that overconfidence that the next time you're not going to land on that carrier. So I think we can never approach ourselves as patting ourselves on the back. So build our team, third line of effort. And why do this? Why do this? Our vision. We want a secure, prosperous hemisphere. You've got to have security to have economic opportunity. And Latin America's number one trading partner overall remains the United States. 67% of all the goods that go through the Panama Canal are U.S., from U.S., tied to the United States in some way. China's a distant third in that race. But they got their game on. They signed 45 agreements with Panama in the last administration in Panama, 45 different agreements, and they locked up port deals on either end of the canal. 3 weekends ago, to get a first-hand view of that, we flew down and we went through the canal, nighttime transit on the Coast Guard cutter James. It's one of our newest national security cutters. 12 hours through the canal with the canal director and the head of security from Panama. Fascinating. You go through the first lock, 1913, the Gatun Lock. The engineering marvel that was built is still an economic lifeline. China's figured that out. Fortunately, we have too, and we have to remain committed to it. But it was very eye-opening. There's a lot of threats to that canal. Cyber and any kind of violent terrorist activity might be a threat. So those are our three lines of effort. We want them for that economic security, that prosperity, this hemisphere. And some of the specific things we're looking at doing as part of that. One is, how do we continue to be the best on the field? How do we outcompete without even saying who? How do we? Well, it's as easy and as hard as being brilliant on the basics in professionalism, in how we do our key leader engagements. I think of it as spokes on a wheel. And those spokes on the wheel, key leader engagements, professionalism, exercises, education. You may have heard the term international military education, IMET, it is a key game changer for developing our partners. Operations, and then I know we've got some industry reps here, and then I say very technical terms, stuff, industry, things. But it doesn't begin there. Lots of times you hear, well, country XYZ, they want F-16s. No, really what we want them to have is professionalism. And we approach that as partners within our interagency. State Department. My deputy commander is a full ambassador just came from El Salvador, Ambassador Gene Maines. I have a military deputy as well. AFRICOM had a similar arrangement, I know, and that's a wonderful partnership. So State Department. Partnership with non-federal entities, private industry, academia. We have a partnership with Florida International University, University of Miami. We've got Spirit of America here. Mr. Hake is a wonderful non-federal entity partner that's working closely with us on the United States Naval Ship Comfort right now. But we take that outcompete model, and we want to double the strength of our key partnerships in the next few years. We want to create more regional security mechanisms. We have a vision of a combined task force in the naval realm. We have a vision of a larger Army exercise. Many of our exercises are focused on smaller scale exercises, but we think it's fit for time, and we're looking at a very large Army formation exercise that will be joint, but bigger than what we have in the past, and we have some willing big nations that are willing to step up and participate in that. We think it's important that we have this vision for the future. And we don't need a lot to accomplish this vision. We have a small amount of resources at SOUTHCOM. And I like to say, somebody asked me, what do you need? I said, I'd like some number of United States Navy ships greater than 0. That I am promised to ship this year. We have a number of Coast Guard ships. We have Army South out of San Antonio as engagement force. We have a joint task force at Sotacana in Honduras. We don't need a lot. We just need to have some on the field. I've never won a game yet where I haven't actually showed up to play the game. So we do have, in most of our cases, adequate number of resources, but I mentioned a few areas. Naval would be one, and some intelligence, and ISR is another area that we're looking to make sure we have what we need to play that game. And it's an important game. Had the opportunity to be on the Comfort several times this year. And there's only one more slide. And I'm reminded that we build this great big nation of ours, this idea, this freedom, one person at a time, right? I mean, somebody influenced me to go into the military, one person at a time. So we were walking along the shore-based medical site, and there was a line of people waiting to see the docs, and this is in Costa Rica. And so we have a Mexican eye doctor beside a United States Navy eye doc, beside a Costa Rican eye doctor, all waiting to and they're all doing these surgeries in a gym that a few weeks before was defunct. Like, it didn't have any windows. There's no air conditioning in any of these buildings, but this gym was full of glass and volunteers and sailors, and we had a joint team there and volunteers from many countries. We had doctors from Argentina, doctors from Venezuela, and I'll talk a little bit about Venezuela. I'm happy to take a question on it. That vicious circle was all made worse by everything Venezuela. But this young lad was waiting in line, and he's partially blind. I'm not sure. I think he had Down syndrome. And his mom is just off the screen. And I gave him a little sticker. I give these kind of cheesy stickers out. Great job stickers. Admiral Cutler got one once. If you get one from me, it's worth a day off. I didn't even bring one tonight. I'm not even going to start. But I'm with my own money, so the lawyers don't get upset. But, 2 cents a piece, they're not a bad deal. But so he feels my face a little, and he's filled my face, and he put his hands on my face just shortly after this, and he gave me a Spanish blessing. That little guy, he can't see very well. He's got Down syndrome. He doesn't have the advantages that we have in life right here in this audience. But for that moment in time, we brought some comfort with United States Naval Comfort. We reached out a hand, because a hand can be just as good as a fist. We can do both pretty well in the United States military. in this hemisphere, it's about shaking hands so we don't have to bring the fist. And we're building this great world of ours one person at a time, just like that little kid and just like all of you coming tonight. So I'll stop there and open it to questions. Thanks.
Good. Thank you very much. Admiral, thank you for that. Could I just get us started? Could you talk a little bit about Guantanamo status today and what's your crystal ball?
Yes, sir. So we go back to the map, the different perspectives. So it's on there. So my command headquarters are the blue circles with a little olive dot in the middle. So Joint Task Force Guantanamo Bay is a mission under my command. It's the safe, legal, humane detention of, there's 39 law of war detainees, there's 1 convicted. So there's 40 individuals. We have about 2,400 of America's finest that are on guard duty, chow, medical, mobile, waterside security, IT, intel. The commissions is another aspect. Commissions is the one, think legal proceedings, commissions, and my team, the safe, legal, humane handling. Brigadier General Mark Martins, 8 years has been heading that commission, and he's been to see me. We talk. To me, he's a hero for what he's invested in trying to get this right. My job is to make sure that we can get it right. We can get there without any other roadblocks, and just emphasizing professionalism each and every day. It's a lot of manpower invested for that, but I think that's what America wants. They want us to do it right, and that's what we're trying to do. So we've been at this, and the numbers have gone way down, but we're at 40 now. Thanks for the question. So it is an important mission for our command. Probably about just a little under half all my manpower. If you added my manpower, they say, "Wow, you got more people than so-and-so." I said, "Right, but half of them are totally in this mission set." And that naval station is a naval station, Guantanamo Bay, strategic asset for the United States. That is separately command and controlled to the United States Navy, not me. This is a piece of that quite large naval station, and we need to treat them as separate because that's an asset we would not. It's our only naval base in this. When you stand at Key West and look out, that's only one south. We have a couple security cooperation locations, we call them. One in Sotocana, Honduras, another little it's a little bit of a ramp space and some fuel in Curacao. That's it. Thanks. We'll just work back. Sir. You strike me as a Naval Academy grad. He introduced himself.
2006.
Yep. Some of us are getting old, right, Neil? Yeah.
So just a quick question, with partnership being a priority in South America, what are we doing well, what are we not doing well to keep the partnerships going?
Right, thanks. So it is a priority. I mean, we're doing more good than we're, on the plus side. So you start with education. So we have schools at Fort Benning, the WINSEC, Western Hemisphere Institute for Security. We have a fairly significant volume of folks that go through there. Some nations, they feel it's of such value, they self-fund over above I kind of look at scholarships. You want graduates from our schools. We have the Inter-American Air Force Academy in San Antonio, similar to WINSEC Air Force focus. We have a Navy version of that in Mississippi, smaller, more special ops, but riverine focus. And then, of course, we position people just like all the other combatant commands in our big PME schools. Cost of education is very high. The International Military Education Training account's been frozen about the same overall dollar level for years, so you get less school seats over time, and you can graph it. It's a game changer. So what are we doing well? We're sticking to it. We require professionalism. So before you can go to these courses, you got to get vetted. And so we check their background as best we can. It's a process called Leahy vetting plays into that. It's a congressional law, but it's the right thing to do. And when we graduate someone from our schools, as you all know, whether it's 3 weeks or 1 year, they're lifelong friends, and they understand the doctrine, and we have a common base, common language which to fight, and work together. Example, El Salvador. Previous administration was not leaning towards the United States, was leaning towards China, had actually signed with China, one belt, one road. And I always say one belt, one road, because it's one way, belt and road with China. And then they moved from Taiwan to China. New president comes in, he's young, energetic. He reached down in, he appointed a minister of defense and a chief of defense, minister of defense, Navy War College grad, chief of defense, Army War College grad. What I also say this is the chief of defense, I looked at a number of schools, way more schools in the U.S. than I've been to, which isn't saying much for a knuckle-dragging ship driver from the Naval Academy, but he was phenomenal. And you can sit and have a conversation about common threats. So that's the best thing we got going is our education. Second, right up there, I would hate to really separate, is exercise program. Exercise programs like our North Star. I mean, you educate, you bring together, you plan it, you come together. We run an annual one, Defense of the Panama Canal, which is one of my by law responsibilities. We run an annual exercise, kind of varies in intensity one year to the next, and that's a big one. We also run an annual SOF-centric exercise. We run a series of exercises focused on humanitarian assistance, but they could cover everything. It's more about learning how to work together. We run one every year in the Caribbean, right before the start of hurricane season, called Trade Winds. Clever name, but it brings a lot of people together. So some things we're doing really well. I think we can, in some cases, crank up the volume a little bit on some of these in terms of more resources, which is what I'd say. We're not always as fast at delivering them. So we get caught up in our own processes sometimes, and so I'd like to see us be more relevant in delivering some. Some of that's just looking in the mirror, but it's working together as a team. We tend to create a lot of rules. Thanks for the question, sir.
Sir, good evening. Mark Murphy with the U.S. Army Peacekeeping and Stability Operations Institute. One, thank you very much for being here. Greatly enjoyed your discussion tonight and very insightful. I have 3 questions for you tonight. Question number 1 is, besides Brazil, who would you view as major security exporters within Latin America? Question number 2 is, can you expand a little bit about the current situation that's happening in Colombia with respect to the peace agreement with the FARC and what's happening down there? And then number 3 is, what keeps you up at night?
Yeah, great. Well, those are three easy questions. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it, Mark. I think you said you were in the Army, right? No, that's good. You served at 2nd Fleet, though. I think. Yeah. All right. So Colombia, I should have mentioned them at the top of the list. So remarkable story. What we've invested in Plan Colombia was a decades-long plan. We stayed with the plan. We invested about $10 billion. They invested more than that of their own money, and you've got a country who actually exports security. The United States Colombian Action Plan. We're the organizers, but they supply the manpower. They've over the last, I think, quote me wrong, whether it was 3 to 5 years, they've trained like 1,500 people in Guatemala as an example. And I use Guatemala because I was in Guatemala last week. So it's the one that's close on my mind. So their special operation forces, their security forces, they go and hold training classes in other countries, and they, it's culturally more relevant. It's the right thing to do, and that investment has paid off. I was out on the Colombian-Ecuador border with the chief of defense for Colombia. He WhatsApps me every day. I have to get Google Interpreter or my XO to help me, or any number of people. But he's just a fantastic war fighter that's seen his nation come from the brink to long ways to go, but sustainable security. We were out on the border of Ecuador and Colombia. We went out. He wanted to show me how hard it is to eradicate coca plants. It is hard, and they're everywhere. But we're flying in 60 Blackhawks that they bought. They're maintaining them with their maintainers. They were impeccably maintained. I mean, they're getting after the maintenance. They are sustaining that maintenance. We don't have that example everywhere around the world. There's other countries where we've tried and we're trying and we're still trying and we don't give up. But this is a country that's working hard and doing a good job and exporting security. There are other pockets of countries that are exporting security that would surprise you. A large contribution of UN peacekeepers from around Latin America. Despite the politics, they still have very capable forces, Chile, Argentina, that export security outside. So those are partners we can work with, and they're at the top of our list of partners that we are working with. Colombia. So certainly Venezuela the disaster of Venezuela that Maduro has made exasperated every security challenge in that vicious circle. And it's become a ground where Russia has gone in, principally to make the United States look bad, but also to protect their economic interests. China is protecting their economic interests. And Cuba is surrounding Maduro. All of Maduro's presidential guard are Cuban. And they've infiltrated every aspect of that society. So in the last year or so, the amount of drugs that are now flowing into Venezuela from Colombia is doubled. And and Maduro's making his money off that, as well as all his cronies. And along with that, the almost lawless land in Venezuela is fertile ground for the FARC dissidents and the ELN, who are declared terrorists by the United States. So they're on our declared terrorist list. And they are using that as a base to subvert and plan and go back into Colombia and try to undermine the stability. All that's contributed to the migration crisis. So over 4 million now have migrated out of Venezuela, and Colombia has seen the bulk of this with over 1.5 million. You see them everywhere when you go in the country. They're every street corner. Same as you go down the coast, same situation in Peru and on down. It's remarkable to me how well the Latin American countries have absorbed the problem and how it hasn't radicalized, frankly. Can't take that for granted going into the future. But Colombia is working hard. Our strong partnership, so our main method of getting after the situation in Venezuela has been to partner with Colombia and Brazil. So sharing intelligence, shared appreciation, looking at planning for the day after. So it's not been a direct approach, it's been with them. And that we're concerned, as they are, about what we're seeing in the increased turmoil coming out of Venezuela. So we're watching it very closely, and particularly in the intelligence world. Your last question keeps you up at night. Goes back to what keeps me up at night. You know, my former boss very famously used to say, well, nothing. And then depending on how he would answer that question, I keep my staff up at night, or I'd like to keep the enemies up at night. The staff one is the one I always appreciated. Admiral Fox and I both worked for him when he was a 4-star general, so we could appreciate that. But you know what keeps me up at night is looking in the mirror, making sure I'm at the top of my game. Am I worthy of the wonderful men and women that are under my command? Am I living up to that challenge, giving them the very best? And of course, you can't just sprint. It's a marathon. You got to pace yourself. All those things that come with it. That's what keeps me up. Well, I try not to let it keep me up at night, because then I'm not healthy to get after it. But it truly is the answer to the question, and which is why I think that line of effort that we have about building our team and being the best team on the field is the most important line of effort of all. That's why, in answer to your question, are we being fast enough and efficient enough on some of our process? So thanks for your 3 questions. All right, moving on back. Yes, sir.
Sir, Mark Troutman, Army Strategic Education International is my company, and appreciate you being here tonight, and appreciate you focusing on that which unites us. So beat Air Force.
We do agree on that today.
We do agree on that.
I didn't see any hands on Air Force Academy grads. I didn't. I have an Air Force aide, but I know he's not Air Force Academy. He's St. Joe's. He could care less about Air Force Academy football.
Sir, it really strikes me that you and Africa Command in particular share a very interesting mission set, where you have to get a lot of your effect by interagency action. And so you have to be very proficient in getting the effect and being kind of little m to some extent. I do a great deal of education of strategists, both U.S. and international, predominantly on the civilian side, and I'm wondering what your advice would be to them in how to develop proficiency of getting that effect through interagency action.
It's a very thoughtful question, and for the record, the AFRICOM commander and I are really close buddies. We served together at CENTCOM, so we have the appreciation of what it's like to be at a command that's engaged every day in kinetic operations, and he's got his fair share of kinetic operations going on now too, but where you're looking more broadly, trying to prevent that very thing, create the sustainable security. I think that I think actually that our education system does a pretty good job of introducing us to the importance of interagency, forging opportunities, because we have to be joint. You're not walking into a joint job cold for the first time at this kind of level. We force that by law, Goldwater and Nichols, so you get the experience somewhere along the line of knowing what it looks like to work with all our services and the interagency partners. And we've been so embedded for so long that you do get that. But nothing really prepares you for the challenges of having to sit down and work through all the different rule sets and the perspectives. So I think that one, just recognizing that we want to keep that M small is part of the. We bring a lot of beef and we bring a lot of stuff, and I may say we have a very small force, and a little goes a long way in SOUTHCOM, but for State Department, they would say, wow, that's more than we have across several continents. So what you said when you said small M, so for everybody, we talk about application of our national security power, DIME, D being diplomacy, I being information, M being military, and E being economic. It's a useful acronym. It turns out it translates horribly in Spanish. I found out from answering questions. They get all confused and look at me, DIME, that's money. And not very much, but yeah, okay. But we want to stay small. So just recognizing that and making sure that we give the predominant voice to State Department. And as a matter of fact, most of my day tomorrow will be spent at State Department meeting with various people and listening to their perspective and making sure we're working together. I sort of always have this thought that comes from working in the Pentagon one too many times, is that where two or more people are gathered, someone will always be confused. And we're two, especially in the Pentagon, and where two or more people are gathered, someone needs to kind of be in charge. But a lot of times in interagency, no one really wants to take that lead because it's not clear who should, because we're all kind of co. So really what it involves in is just working together and having a conversation and getting that shared understanding, and that takes time and investment of effort and getting to know people, building trust. I won't forget you there, Tony.
Evening, Admiral. I'm Christopher Welty. I'm a former submariner, USS Albuquerque. Got out, now I work with analyst company systems planning and analysis. My question is specifically with regard to great power competition in the South Americas. Great powers have a lot of levers that they can pull between debt traps, manipulation with democratic processes, things like that. What are the levers that you see being pulled lately by foreign great powers that are concerning you the most?
Right, so aspiring great powers, China and Russia, and they're different. Russia is in a different place than China. So I'll just focus on China because it's the most complicated one we have. And for all our sake, we want it to work out. The future demands that it work out. They are our largest trading partner here in the United States. They're Brazil's largest trading partner. So these are important conversations that we have to have about what the facts are and where we need to go. But we can't, which is what I appreciate about the National Defense Strategy. Calling out competition allows us to have a conversation about those facts. And I do feel that in some instances we're at conflict in terms of those information space values. So the things you cite, certainly the loans, a problem. There are examples around the world, and I cited one with a highway in one of our countries, and that exists. I think China's learning, they're trying to adapt, but it's still a problem, and the loans are not always advantageous to the person that's getting the money. That's one. IT infrastructure is another significant concern, because if your IT infrastructure is state-owned, which all their companies, by law, the data will be state-owned, then how do we have a relationship where I can trust the exchange of that data with a partner? So there's very frank conversations I've had with the military folks I deal with, but they're all subject to the same thing I am as policy makers and economic interests. So we have to come up with an alternative for that for the United States, and I know we're working real hard on that, but it can't come fast enough. So IT is so important, and it's the gateway to cyber. Space, another one. So China has invested heavily in space, and that includes movement into this area with space stations and equity in space stations in Argentina and Chile and elsewhere. So Russia is the same. They've got equity in some of the space stations. So when you see that, and people say, well, but they don't have physical presence in the terms of naval bases. Well, no, that's not really the game that's being played right now. That could come, and it could come pretty rapidly. But if you lock up space, you lock up IT, you lock up port access, you have leverage and information. Another area, arms sales, not high, about 615 million over the last 5 years or so for China. That's a soft figure without my cheat sheet here, but not high. But what's high is China's gifts of military stuff, trucks, small boats, things, and it's happening everywhere. China and Russia to a lesser extent, but there's some legacy arms sales that Russia have. And of course, both Russia and China have heavily invested in Venezuela, and Russia is in there as we speak, helping Venezuela get their aircraft and some of their infrastructure in a more ready and operable state, although Maduro's done his best to counter any good that anybody, I say good, would do, because he's running it right into the ground. But I really look at it as far more than just economics. Thank you. Anthony?
Amber, good to see you again. I think last time I saw you was 6 years ago when I was AOSUN's Ledge Director, and had a meeting with you and Dan Cimino at the time, and good to see you. I'm currently supporting some NAVSEA PEOs, doing some congressional support services. You mentioned in some of your testimony, you just mentioned today, that you are looking for particular naval asset support and particularly ISR capabilities. Are there other capabilities that you're looking for that these naval assets can bring to you in SOUTHCOM?
Well, what we really need is intelligence, and intelligence drives everything. So the more we can understand what's happening in the world around us, the better decisions we're going to be able to make. That's what our partners want, and that's what we focus on. A basic building block of security cooperation is intelligence sharing. We're actually making some real progress there. And that could be from ISR, could be from big data, could be from other systems, could be unmanned of various types. So it just happens, I think, that ISR is one of those niches. In every naval ship and every Coast Guard cutter out there is in effect an intelligence gathering platform, whether it's just the eyes and ears of the sailors and the Coast Guardsmen, cuttermen and women that serve on them. So those are some of the things we need. Yeah.
John Kaskin from Navy League. Admiral, I got two questions. First has to do with naval assets. Your Fourth Fleet commander has always been struggling to get assets, particularly after the frigates went away. One of the assets that has been made available in the past is the EPF, formerly the Joint High-Speed Vessel. How do you see that that asset could be employed in your theater? For example, could embarked security teams from the Coast Guard be used, or how would you envision them? And the second question is what I was expected might have been asked before, is what is the impact of the vote on the Rio Treaty will have on your command on trying to address the Venezuela problem?
So we thanks for the question about variety of ships. So there's a variety of platforms out there, and many of them are well suited for Latin America and the Caribbean. It's not an active operation area. They have the ability to be reconfigurable and to go in shallow water and engage with partner nations who often have smaller platforms. So the EPF, Expeditionary Fast Transport, built down in Mobile, Alabama, is one of them. It's real suitable. I think we have 14 of them. I'd take all 14 of them tomorrow. And because we could put them to good use, we could put a small mobile surgical unit in the back of one, run it up a small river and do some medical readiness exercises and help build trust with local populations. We could take it out to sea and do exercise. We have one right now in theater that's the number one in the class. The other ship is the Expeditionary Staging Base. These are big, huge ships that you can do a lot with, build out in San Diego. I think we've got about 5 at sea. I'll take all 5 of those too. So we've got a multi-mission platform that we're working with right now, mostly contract, but there's an opportunity here to put pressure on those. We talk about getting after threats. So the best way to get after threats, build partners. Get the partners strong, they can get after the threats themselves. But we also have to put pressure on them ourselves. So we have about 5 Coast Guard cutters covering the area of the United States right now, which is kind of what you look at from the Caribbean and the Western and the Eastern Pacific. So putting some other platforms out there with some unmanned on those platforms, extending the reach. If we're out there, we're at sea, our partners are going to come out too. So that was, I think that gets after. Your second one was? Rio Treaty. So Rio Treaty is Article 6. It has been invoked, and a couple people are not abstained, didn't vote for it, but it does make a statement about the collective will of the hemispheres. The hemisphere's never been this unified. So while all those vicious circle threats I talked about, Venezuela's made them all worse, it's also unified. So there's 50 plus countries that have recognized the legitimate government of Guaido, and there is hemisphere unity through the Rio Treaty, through the Lima Group, which is a group of nations, like-minded nations, through Lima, Peru, that all want to see democracy restored. So I think it's a good thing. It doesn't mean we're about to invade, but it does mean we need to be ready and on the balls of our feet, which is what our command's been working hard at. So thank you. Yes, sir.
Good evening, sir. Thank you again for your service. Jim Olson here. Question, you had mentioned the vicious circle of illicit activities and how that permeates worldwide in those connections. I think you understand, as you mentioned China, you mentioned some of the connections there. CENTCOM certainly seems to have understood that network and how to try to go after that. I mentioned you and SOUTHCOM certainly deal with that in the drug trafficking world. How is that translating into the Department of Defense usage of that, and how is that being integrated in the whole military system and how we fight wars? We see it in other areas, okay? See it in Crimea, we see it in also how Russia applies it. So it's this insurgent warfare going to be mixed in with regular warfare in the future. Right. How is DOD? How do you see that being addressed by DOD?
Well, I think one of the there's a couple answers to that, and I think we're getting after it. It's a tough problem, but I do think we're back to the grade of okay. I think we're okay in terms of how we've gotten after it. There's a lot of work to be done yet. I'd answer in 2 ways. One, all threats being global, and with folks being able to impact the United States security from halfway around the world sitting in a basement. We've got to recognize that. So our plans have to be globally integrated, and our operations have to be globally integrated. And of course, we're regionally organized in terms of regional combatant commands. One of the big accomplishments under General Dunford was this idea of global integration, global plans, global processes. We're working very hard to ensure that we have a global approach to those problems, which I would say they're all trans-regional, trans-global. There is no problem that is specific. We had our plan for SOUTHCOM was called Defending the Southern Approaches. So we changed the name. We're not going to call it Defend the Southern Approaches because that seems to indicate that the threat may just come from the South. Well, it could come from the South, but it could come around the globe, and we may not know where it originates. So that's part of your answer. The other part is recognition that we're in competition right now. So the notion that we're at somehow below the level of armed conflict, well, that's true. Maybe in this hemisphere, maybe in various places of the world, we're not shooting at each other kinetically. But in terms of using cyberspace and information as a weapon to change things, to influence things, to do things, we're in that fight right now. And I think that's to your point. And I think we've moved out in that very smartly here in this country over the last several years, and I think very effectively. But again, you're only as good as the last time you landed, and so this is an area we've got to continue to work hard at. There's not a lot of capacity in some of those things, so we're not going to have a whole cyber army that's ever going to work for me. I wouldn't expect that, but they're going to be able to work globally for our national interests and across our own interagency between Homeland Security, which has that aspect of protecting us, and the DOD. Two more, sir.
Sir, Dan Roper with AUSA. Following up on that last question, could you talk specifically about, to the degree that you can, on the trans-regional collaboration to counter malign influence from Iran and its proxies?
Yeah, no, thanks. I didn't mention Iran. I can't believe I got this long without talking about the largest state sponsor of terror in the world, if you consider them a country and not a revolutionary cause. They are, wherever you look around the world and there's something evil happening, malfeasance is my favorite word. Iran's generally got a finger in it. And so in this hemisphere is it's not sacred from it. Think Argentina in 1996, where there was a massive terrorist attack. Iran was behind that. Think right here in Washington, D.C., where the Saudi Arabian ambassador was killed just, not far from the White House. So, there's active activity here. We've got a global effort, global campaign plan to go after that. SOUTHCOM, the United States Special Operations Command, Tampa is lead on that. And again, we talked about intelligence sharing, basis of everything. We've really moved out in a very meaningful way with multinational intel sharing at various levels. There's places where we're doing it, and we're doing it very effectively to pass information. Most of it is just available. It's a matter of grabbing it, synthesizing it, translating it, getting it to the right people. Often it's a law enforcement agency, so busting through. In my AOR, I had a couple individuals that recently helped in Brazil it was a multinational thing between Peru and Brazil where we busted some folks that were headed our way that were up to no good, and we sent them away. And so it's happening. So there's it's only part of it though, right? You got to track it, you got to understand it, you got to catch them, you got to detain them, you got to deter them, but we also got to get after the conditions that spawn it to begin with. Which takes me back to the promise of this hemisphere. There's some conditions here, but we don't have a lot of violent extremist terrorist activity, and I credit that to the values and the democracies and the ideology that people share. It's a big piece of it, and the value of education. One more.
Admiral Pat Dumont from Navy League, your neighbor in Fort Lauderdale. Over the years, I've had the chance to come to SOUTHCOM after the hurricane in Haiti. You all convened over 100 NGOs in their plan of how to help the people there, and I've traveled to Honduras and El Salvador with SOUTHCOM. So after our current hurricane that our folks in the Bahamas faced, I just wanted to know what the good things that you all are doing there to support them.
Well, thank you for that. So in the way we divide up the world, the Bahamas actually is my shipmate, General O'Shaughnessy in Northern Command. So the Bahamas and all the U.S. territories and Puerto Rico. But we were in collaboration with General O'Shaughnessy from day one. Everything starts with the Office of Foreign Disaster Assistance from USAID. They work with the country teams and generate a demand, and we turn that pretty quickly. With remarkable speed, I would say, within DOD, when there's a demand that we all agree on and the nation needs it. And they send a number of helicopters, lift, medics. And it's from the DOD standpoint, it's ramped down significantly. We sent some ships that were doing counter-narcotics missions through our Joint Interagency Task Force South in Key West, which is my key team for getting after the CN fight. We sent some ships for a short period of time. The Brits played. They have a big amphibious ship in the Caribbean right now that was working for me under a counter-narcotics mission. They sent that up as an amphibious ship. Jamaica's got a detachment there helping out. So it's the local counties here. I know Fairfax County sent a ton of people. So it was really, I think, it was coordinated pretty well. So we're just waiting for the next one. I see a few of them out there. It's that time of year. Keep pretty close to the phone. Well, thank you all for this opportunity. Great questions. We in our day-to-day pull, we think a lot about East-West, China-Russia. You look east, you look west, you look at NATO. But it's a global world. We've got to look globally. We've got to look where we can play our strong hand. Where do we have that advantage? You can go to the last slide. Where can we make the best investment? Where does a little bit of our time, a little bit of our talent, the right focus of our energy, our security cooperation, our education, where does it give us a payoff for the future? We certainly have to make sure that invested well here in our neighborhood. Thanks for your time.